Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Big Questions, Small Steps. My name is Amanda and I'm so glad that you could join me today. Today, we're going to talk about something kind of spicy. We're going to talk about sex and modesty, periods, as well as birth control. So this probably isn't a good episode to have on when you have little ones around. Okay, let's dive in because I want to explore these particular aspects within the Jewish, Islamic, and Christian cultures. And I wanted to find out, what do each of them say? How do they react to these different portions? Are you ready to join me? Let's dig in. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is modesty. Modesty is basically a way of describing dress as well as actions where you're basically not trying to draw extra attention to yourself. Okay, so in Judaism, the standard of modesty is dictated by the community. So there are different movements, and the different movements have different viewpoints as to what is modest. So for the sake of consistency, I'm going to speak mostly from what the Torah says, and then I'll give you examples to kind of help you understand the spectrum, okay? So according to the Jewish Torah, it is in the book of Numbers, chapter 5, verse 18. There is a verse relating to a person's hair, a female's hair, and when they are standing before God or Hashem. And basically it's about that they will see their hair and no every hair on their body. So some are very diligent about this verse in particular, and they believe that once you are married, you are going to cover your hair. Now, some people shave their head and then wear a wig. There are some people who wear a scarf around their head, and there are some people who don't. But according to that verse, people who are married are supposed to cover their hair. Okay? Now, as far as the dress or attire, the Torah says men dress modestly as with your wife. Okay, but it doesn't really say anything about what they can and can't wear. They just say to dress modestly. So the Jews have to look into the book of Halakha, which is basically additional information for them. And depending on your movement, again, will depend on what your community's view of modest is. Typically, in the most conservative groups, you would have to have your arm covered all the way down to past your elbow. You would have to not be wearing any clothes that are skin tight to show the form of your body. You should have pants or a skirt on that covers your knee while you are sitting. Certainly you cannot be showing cleavage. Some say you cannot show your collarbone, and you certainly should not be showing your midriff. Now, again, different movements, different communities, different interpretations on that. There are some communities that absolutely abide in this. There are some communities that live where it's really hot, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with going to synagogue and seeing people in sleeveless shirts. Not a problem at all. Now, my shirt happens to have cutaways on the sleeve. I personally would not wear this shirt to my synagogue. It's too revealing for me at my synagogue. My preferences, okay? Now, if we switch gears and look at Islam, they are very firm on guarding their modesty. In particular, they have a verse 24:31, and it says, believing women should lower gaze. So they believe that women in particular should be very modest. there are similar verses that are about males, and they are supposed to be modest as well. So they are supposed to guard their private areas, essentially, whenever a woman is walking by and lower their gaze. That is one of the reasons that in Islam, traditionally, when you get married, or when you enter puberty in Islam, you typically wear a headscarf. Typically. Now, some wear a headscarf, a face veil. Some wear a whole burqa, which covers you from head to foot. There are different versions, but typically you will cover your body, so you cannot have parts exposed, but you could have a headscarf on and wear normal clothes that are not covering. Does that make sense at all? Like, you could still wear jeans potentially and have a headscarf on. And then you could also be in that same community and you could wear like a full garment that you cannot see your body's shape in, depending on your practice and your observance level, okay? There is a rule in Islam that the husband is not supposed to dictate what the wife wears. However, customs are different than the law. So in that tradition, in that custom, in that community, the man tends to have more power, and the man will dictate what they can wear for the most part. Okay, but the woman at the core still has a choice. Okay, now flip to Christianity, and Paul basically says that Paul is one of the main writers for the New Testament. Paul says that modesty protects the intimate center of one's being. That's what he says about that. Okay, there is essentially nothing written in there that says you have to be modest. Now, in general, the general consensus in the Christian church is you should dress modestly when you're coming to church. What I was told growing up is you're coming to the Lord's house, so why would you wear something that you wouldn't want to wear to your grandparents' house? So it may be frowned upon, your clothing choices, but they can't necessarily do anything about it. It may be frowned upon, but it's not anything they're going to do anything about. So there are two other places that talk about modesty, so I'm going to share them with you. So St. Thomas the Aquinas said being honest in your outward appearance is more important than being modest. Okay, so he basically said make sure that what you're putting out there is actually you. Don't try to put on a show and get more attention than you actually would normally do. And then Proverbs 7 verse 10 says believers should never seek out sexual attention by the way they dress. So again, it doesn't say specifically that they have to be modest or what modesty is, but it does talk about that you probably should be a little bit concerned about what your appearance is. You should care how you look when you come to church, according to Christians. Okay? So the next one that we're going to talk about is the lovely periods. This is a time in a woman's life cycle. We're going to talk about biological women in this point of view, just for the sake of clarity. And we're going to look at it through the three different religions again: Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Okay, so let's start with Judaism. In Judaism, there are a whole set of laws again relating to this specific time within a woman's life. It's called the laws of Nidah, and it's basically talking about when they are spiritually impure, because there was a possibility of life with the egg, and then the egg did not get fertilized, and hence it's a slight mourning period because that life that was a possibility did not come to fruition. Okay? In Leviticus, there's multiple readings on this. There's Leviticus 12, 15, 18, and 20. And basically it says specific things that you're supposed to do if a woman is on her period. A woman is impure or unclean at that time in Judaism, okay? So they need to they have different things to do before they can be clean or pure again, okay? This time period goes from the start of their period until they go into the mikveh. Now, there are different interpretations as to when they need to go into the mikveh. Some believe that when you have your period, you have to wait 7 days after and then go in the mikveh and then you're clear. Some believe you wait 3 days after and then go in the mikveh and then you're clear. Some believe you can go into the mikveh right away as soon as you're done, and some don't go into the mikveh at all after their period. And that's just what they do. They believe that when they go in the mikveh, they are purified again, and they are born again, essentially. And they have that close connection with Hashem. So during this period of the spiritual impurity by the female, the husband and wife will not sleep in the same bed. They'll sleep in separate beds. And depending on their observance level, they will do other things, all in an attempt to ease the temptation. Because when a woman is on their period, they are not supposed to have sexual intercourse with their husband. Okay, so that may be that they sleep in separate beds, sleep in separate rooms, don't have any physical contact, no kissing, no touching, no hugging, no nothing. They could kiss, touch, hug, all that stuff. Or they could also sleep in the same bed, but use separate bed linens. Different people have different viewpoints on that. The reason that they do this while the woman is bleeding again is because she is impure. And that might sound kind of funny to your ear. Basically, in the Jewish culture, once upon a time, they had animal sacrifices when they had the first and second temple. We do not have a temple right now. And the blood was spilled when they made animal sacrifices. And blood is holy. So when a woman is on her period, she is bleeding. So she's spiritually impure. She's ridding her body of this soul that could have been but is not. And she's in like a spiritual protection bubble, essentially. It's not to penalize her that she is separated from her husband. It's because she's in a different state at that point. She's grieving the loss of that child. She's maybe in pain. She's just emotional. So they have those laws. Okay, in Islam, there are specific verses as well. In the Quran, in chapter 222, it says, it is harm or a painful situation. So keep away from wives during menstruation and do not approach them until they are pure. That just makes me laugh a little bit. Because it basically, to me, when I read it, it sounds like, ooh, stay away from your wife. She's in trouble. Don't mess with her. And, when you're on your period, you tend to be a little bit more hormonal. And that imagery in my head is just kind of comical. So in Islam, they try to keep away as far as keeping that safety net around and being extra protective of the wife or the woman during that time. The woman is in charge of maintaining her hygiene. They're very big about hygiene, but she is not allowed or permitted to pray while she is on her period. If she's in the middle of fasting or if she's in the middle of the month of Ramadan, she has to stop that as well because she's now impure. So she needs to eat. She can't fast. She can't do any of that stuff. So in Judaism, there was like the extreme where you can't touch, you can't sleep in the same bed, anything like that. You can't have sex, certainly. In Islam, you can do everything except sex. You can do everything except. You could do oral sex, you could do anal sex. You cannot do vaginal sex while she's on her period. That's what the rule is. It's just interesting. And a little side part that I found out in my research is just, again, kind of funny. A man is not allowed to divorce a woman when she is on her period. Cannot. You cannot just divorce someone. And I'm not sure if that was like a condition to make sure that they were not acting hastily because of hormonal fluctuations. But a man is not permitted to divorce a woman if she is menstruating. They need to wait until after she is done. Now, when she is finished menstruating, there's no ritual she needs to perform or anything. She's just done, and she can go back to praying and doing everything like normal. Okay? In Christianity, there are also no specific rules or rituals. There are different thoughts as far as trying to protect women, but there's nothing necessarily written in stone that they can't do certain things, with the exception of the Coptic Orthodox Church. If you are in the Coptic Orthodox Church and you are female and you are menstruating, you are not allowed to attend church, because you need to just take care of yourself. You need to stay at home and rest and relax, okay? In the Eastern Oriental Church, you are not permitted to receive communion. You can come to church, but you can't receive communion. Why? Because it is too physically difficult to receive communion during your period. I know, isn't that very enlightening? You didn't know that drinking a cup and ingesting bread was so difficult. But that's what the Eastern Oriental practice, that's what they do if you are on your period. Now, there was also a pope, and he's got a name that I'm going to butcher, and I apologize. Pope Dionysius of Alexandria. And he's quoted as saying, not even they themselves, being faithful, would dare approach the Lord's table in that condition. So he didn't outright say that you shouldn't come to receive sacraments of communion or church if you're on your period, but that phrase doesn't exactly sound warm and inviting to me. So it's interesting when looking at this natural phenomenon that happens with women, that there are such varying viewpoints as to how to interact with them during that time. Intriguing. Let's talk about sex. Okay? Now, in sex, in this section in particular, we're talking about premarital sex, not what is permissible and not permissible between a husband and a wife. No, this is specifically through the 3 different religions. What is their view on premarital sex? Okay, so let's start with Judaism to be consistent, and we'll just run through them all. Here we go. So in the Jewish community, the rabbinic community, so that's a bunch of rabbis, the rabbinic community says that premarital sex is sinful. But it violates the community rules, but they know that there is that temptation there, okay? And there's a gray area because in the Torah has specific notations about adultery and incest, but it doesn't specifically say about premarital sex. Okay? So they have things about having sex with someone else's spouse. They have things in there about having sex with family members, but they don't have information in there about sex with someone that you're not married to. Okay? The purpose of sex in Judaism is to reinforce that marital bond. So sex in a marriage is encouraged. Premarital sex it's typically frowned upon, but okay, as long as your goal, as long as it's going to eventually lead to marriage. So it's not like they would condone, it's not like they would encourage Jewish people to go and sleep around with a whole bunch of people. But if you are in a committed relationship and that has the potential to lead to marriage, then that's okay in the Jewish tradition. Okay? Now, in contrast, Islam has a complete different viewpoint. In Islam, not only is premarital sex forbidden, it's punishable by the court system. And as a matter of fact, any physical touch at all with a person of the opposite gender that's not related to you is not permitted. You can't do a hug. You can't do handshakes. You're not even supposed to sit very close next to somebody who is of the opposite gender. They want to have that separation. And an extension of that, they also do not permit masturbation because they want to protect your sexual organs except from your spouse. So you shouldn't violate yourself. You shouldn't be enjoying any of those parts of your body, those experiences, except with your spouse. That's their very firm rule on that, okay? Now, there is a way that some Islamic communities get around that, and there are different requirements in order to get married, and one of them is age. And so for boys, it tends to be about 15. Girls, it tends to be 9. So you can be married as young as that. However, there are other requirements, and sometimes if two people are very much in love and they want to get married and all this other stuff, but they're just not quite ready to financially be on their own, but they want to have sex and that intimacy, they will get married but not finish one of the portions of the marriage. So that they're married, but they can still live with their individual families. They can still finish their schooling and all this other stuff, and they can still have sex, but they don't have that responsibility yet. That's kind of a wiggle room area in Islam, okay? In Christianity, it's very much a community decision, and they follow the rules of that country. So in the United States, for example, you typically need to be 18 in order to be married without your parents' permission. In some of the states in the South, I know you can be married at 16. I think there's even a state where you can get married at 14 with your parents' permission. So premarital sex in the Christian community is typically frowned upon, but at the same time, they have the same response that they do for many of the other things, where it's your decision, that's between you and God. It's not a church thing, it's a you thing. So, and they have 2 different verses that they pull from for understanding this more. So it's Exodus 20, verse 15. It says, "You shall not commit adultery." Adultery. Adultery is sleeping with someone else's spouse, not a person who is not married. So if it's 2 single people, there's nothing necessarily that's wrong with that according to that verse, okay? In Hebrews 13:4, it says, "Let marriage be held in honor above all." So in that verse, it's saying that marriage is like the goal, and that's what you want to aspire to. However, other things may happen. You just need to hold that marriage at that higher level. Okay? Again, very interesting. We're going to take a look at one more area. Birth control. So you had sex and now you might be pregnant. Good thing, bad thing? Let's see, shall we? Okay, so in Judaism, they use the verse from Genesis 1, verse 28. It says, "Be fruitful and multiply." Basically meaning you should do everything possible to reproduce. And again, some movements will take that more literally than others. There are some that want you to have as many children as possible. And there are some movements and some practices where they want you to have as many children as financially and mentally possible for you. So that might mean you have 2 kids. That might mean you have 0 kids. It might mean you have 14. It depends on how you practice. Okay, there is a mitzvah or a law in Torah regarding men, regarding birth control, and that's they are not to do anything that would prevent a pregnancy. So they are, in that mitzvah, they're supposed to aim to have 1 boy and 1 girl. Okay, that's the mitzvah. So because of what it says in Torah, a Jewish man is not supposed to wear a condom because it blocks the passage of semen to the Jewish woman. So man is not supposed to wear a condom. However, the pill doesn't block anything. The pill isn't taking the egg from the ovary and throwing it away. The pill is just restraining the release of that egg. So the pill is okayed by the Rabbinical Association, but condoms are not. Okay? Now, in Judaism, health risks, mental health, and financial burdens are all reasons that are completely approved to have birth control. However, there are very big stigmas attached in certain communities if you don't have children or if you don't have a large family, to the point that if you are unable to have children and you live in those communities, you might be looked down upon. You might be looked down on as you are less of a woman because you are not able to bring forth children. In some communities, not all communities. Now, that raises the question, if they're okay with the pill, they're not okay with condoms, what are their thoughts on abortions? Are abortions permitted? Great question. I checked it out for you. So in Judaism, they believe that life begins at birth. Okay, that's what they believe. And they don't necessarily encourage abortions. However, they do believe that if the mother's life is in jeopardy, an abortion is permitted. It's not the first choice, but it is a choice that is on the table in Judaism. Okay, now jumping back to birth control, let's move to Islam. Okay, so Islam, if you remember, there is no premarital sex. None at all. No physical contact with the opposite gender at all. So birth control in Islam, surprise, is not a problem. It's not a problem. You do have to agree on it between you and your husband. They're going to go on birth control, and children should still be on your plan. But if you want to take birth control for a while until you finish school or until you do this or that's okay, as long as it's still on your plan. Okay? Now, on the side of abortion, it's forbidden. It's forbidden. It is not to be done at all. But if it is done, it must be done before the fetus's soul is infused with its body. I know. And the Islamic people have that down to about 4 to 4.5 months. So if you are 4 to 4.5 months and you want an abortion, it's not the best choice. They don't like it. But if your life is in jeopardy, then they will allow it. If it is after 4.5 months, they will not do an abortion. They may induce a labor and then let the baby go in to like intensive care and get as much help as possible to see if they can survive on their own. But they will not do an abortion to terminate the pregnancy after the soul has joined with the fetus. Okay. And then in Christianity, they again reference Genesis 1 verse 28, the be fruitful and multiply. And again, some denominations fixate on that a little bit more. It used to be in the Catholic faith, they would not do birth control at all. That has since changed slightly. Basically, their thought with birth control is just as it was with the food, just as it was with premarital sex, and everything else before. It's a you do you kind of thing, and you are responsible to God. As a matter of fact, they even reference Romans 14 verse 22, which says, each of us will render for accounts of himself to God. So basically that's between you and God. You guys take care of it. You figure it out. What's best for your family, he knows. And they don't worry about it. They don't worry about it. When it comes to abortion, again, it varies. It varies. There are many in the Catholic faith that are very pro-life. And from the moment that that baby has a heartbeat, that they believe that baby is a baby and their baby's rights are just the same as the mother's. There are some that believe the mother's needs supersede the baby's needs. There are many different viewpoints. Again, it goes back to you are going to be accounting for your choices to God, and it's not necessarily anyone's place to judge that. So that's the down dirty version of sex, birth control, modesty, periods, and how that all reacts or how that all interacts within Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. I was very intrigued by the knowledge, and I hope you found something enjoyable as well. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.